Have you ever wondered what it truly takes to experience a miracle? What if everything you believed about healing was turned upside down in the blink of an eye? How does someone go from being told they have only 24 hours to live to walking out of the hospital the next day completely healed? Could this really be possible? But here's the twist. This story isn't just about physical recovery. It's about something far deeper. What if the key to healing wasn't just prayer, but the faith of those around you? Could the power of belief be stronger than we ever imagined? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll hear something that will change the way you see the world and the true power of faith. Before we dive into this moving story, take a moment to comment below where you're watching from today. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that will stay with you long after they're told. Trust me, you won't want to miss a second of this incredible journey. Olivia Bills awoke to the soft glow of early morning sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. The quiet hum of the house was peaceful, interrupted only by the distant sound of birds chirping outside. She stretched lazily, her arms reaching toward the ceiling, her body still heavy with the remnants of sleep. As a 45-year-old teacher in the small town of Maple Ridge, Olivia's life was filled with routine, a blend of hard work, devotion to her family, and her passion for educating the next generation. She slipped out of bed and padded softly down the hallway toward the kitchen. The familiar sounds of her two children, Lily and Jake, could be heard from the dining room. Lily, the older of the two, was already at the table, her cereal bowl half empty, with her nose buried in her phone. Jake, the younger one, was nowhere in sight. "Good morning, sweetie," Olivia greeted as she entered the kitchen, a warm smile on her face. Lily glanced up, offering a half-hearted smile, her eyes still glazed over with sleep. "Morning, Mom," she mumbled before returning to her phone, tapping away at the screen. Olivia chuckled softly. "You'll be the first one to tell me you're tired after a long night of staring at your phone." Lily didn't respond, her focus entirely on the digital world in her hands. Olivia turned to the stove, starting to prepare breakfast, the smell of sizzling eggs filling the air. A soft rustling from the hallway signaled Jake's arrival. He appeared, still in his pajamas, his hair a messy tangle. "Mom, you okay? You don't look like you're feeling too good," Jake asked, his voice laced with concern. Olivia turned and gave him a reassuring smile, though she could feel the fatigue weighing on her. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired, that's all. Got a lot to do today." Jake eyed her for a moment longer before nodding, seemingly unconvinced, but he moved to the table and started his own breakfast. The morning was spent in the usual rush. Olivia had always taken pride in making sure her kids started their day right, no matter how tired she felt. She served breakfast, helped them with their backpacks, and gave them the gentle reminders she always did. "Don't forget your homework, Lily. And Jake, try not to get distracted by your games." Lily sighed, rolling her eyes. "I know, Mom." Jake grinned. "I'll be fine, Mom, don't worry." Once they were out the door, Olivia stood at the window, watching them walk to the school bus. Her smile faded as she leaned against the kitchen counter, feeling a wave of exhaustion sweep over her. Her body felt as if it had been drained of all energy. Her hands trembled slightly, but she ignored it, blaming it on the stress of balancing work and family life. She had always prided herself on her ability to juggle everything, but lately it felt harder. The fatigue was constant, and she found herself waking up with dull aches in her body that never seemed to go away. A headache here, a tightness in her chest there. She dismissed it all as stress. After all, it was normal, wasn't it? By the time Olivia arrived at the school, the familiar rhythm of the classroom settled in. She was met with smiles from her students, and as always, she threw herself into teaching. The chalkboard was her stage, and her students were her audience. She engaged them with energy, never letting on how tired she really was. But as the day wore on, something was different. The dizziness that had lingered in the back of her mind all morning began to feel more pronounced. She pressed her palm to her forehead, trying to steady herself as a wave of nausea rushed over her. It wasn't the first time she had felt this way in recent weeks, but today it felt worse. She tried to push through, smiling and answering her students' questions, but the ache in her side grew sharper and her vision blurred. She grabbed the edge of her desk for support, her knuckles turning white. "Mrs. Bills," one of her students called out, concern in their voice. "I'm fine," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a little dizzy. We'll continue in just a moment." But the truth was, she wasn't fine. The pain was getting harder to ignore. Still, she pressed on, trying to keep up the appearance of being the strong, capable teacher she had always been. After all, no one needed to know how badly she was struggling. That night, Olivia sat at the dinner table with her kids, trying to keep up with their lively conversations. But the dull ache in her side wouldn't subside. Her head felt heavy, and she had to focus on each word as she responded to her children. "Mom, you okay?" Lily asked again, her eyes narrowing in concern as she watched her mother's face pale. "I'm fine," Olivia replied softly, brushing it off with a weak smile. "Just a long day." As her children headed to bed, Olivia stayed behind, cleaning up the kitchen in the quiet of the night. But the discomfort was growing, her chest tight and her side throbbing in pain. She paused, leaning against the counter for a moment. Something didn't feel right. After a long sigh, Olivia made her way to bed. She tried to sleep, but the pain kept her awake. Her heart raced, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, far worse than just stress. But what was she supposed to do about it? She had no time to see a doctor. There was always more to do, more people to care for. In the darkness, she whispered to herself, "It's nothing. It's just stress. I'll be fine." But deep down, Olivia couldn't shake the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't nothing. Olivia sat in the sterile white room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The familiar sounds of the hospital, distant beeping machines and hushed conversations, creating a constant backdrop. She had been to Dr. Mary Jones's office countless times for routine checkups over the years, but today felt different. The air felt heavier, the room colder. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, trying to distract herself from the knot forming in her stomach. Dr. Jones, a kind and seasoned physician, entered with a warm smile as usual. She had always been someone Olivia could rely on, and today, more than ever, Olivia needed that sense of trust. Dr. Jones greeted her softly, her voice calm yet carrying an undercurrent of concern. "Olivia, how are you feeling today?" Dr. Jones asked, settling into the chair across from her. I'm okay, I guess," Olivia replied, her voice faint. The words felt empty as they left her mouth, and she realized how much she had been lying to herself lately. Just tired, more than usual. Dr. Jones nodded, her expression serious as she sifted through the paperwork in front of her. "You mentioned some persistent pain and dizziness. I've gone through the test results. I think it's time we talk about them." Olivia's stomach tightened. She hadn't realized until now just how much she had been dreading this moment. She nodded, silently urging Dr. Jones to continue. Her heart began to race, but she kept her gaze fixed on the doctor's face, searching for any hint of reassurance. "I know you've been feeling unwell for some time, Olivia," Dr. Jones began, her voice soft but unwavering. "And I can see that the pain is starting to take its toll on you. We've run a series of tests over the past week, and unfortunately the results are not what we hoped." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She felt the blood rush from her face, her hands cold and clammy. "What do you mean? What's wrong?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, though her mind raced with 1,000 fearful possibilities. Dr. Jones hesitated, clearly struggling with how to deliver the news. She met Olivia's eyes, her gaze full of empathy. "Olivia, the tests confirm that you have advanced pancreatic cancer. The tumors are widespread, and unfortunately there's no viable treatment at this stage." The words hit Olivia like a blow to the chest. The room seemed to blur around her, and for a moment she wasn't sure if the world had tilted or if it was just her mind scrambling to process what Dr. Jones had just said. Cancer. It couldn't be true. This couldn't be happening to her. She had been healthy, strong. She had so much to live for. "Are you sure?" Olivia's voice cracked, her hands trembling. "There has to be some mistake. There has to be something you can do." "I'm so sorry, Olivia," Dr. Jones said gently. "I know this is hard to hear. We've looked at every option, and at this point, there's nothing more we can do. The cancer is too advanced." For a moment Olivia was silent, her mind reeling. She stared blankly at the doctor, her thoughts a jumbled mess. "So, what does this mean? What do I do now?" Dr. Jones gave her a moment to absorb the news before responding. "I'm afraid it means you have very little time. We're talking about 24 hours, Olivia. You need to make your peace. We'll keep you comfortable, of course, but I want you to understand the gravity of the situation." Olivia felt as though the floor had been ripped out from under her. 24 hours? She repeated the words, tasting their bitterness. How could this be real? How could her life be slipping away so quickly? "I know this is overwhelming," Dr. Jones said softly. "But I want you to know that we're here for you. You're not alone in this. Olivia's mind drifted in a fog, unable to process the reality of the situation. Dr. Jones's words echoed in her ears, but the world around her felt far away. It wasn't until the door opened and Olivia's husband Mark walked in with a look of concern on his face that she snapped back to the present. Mark looked at her with wide eyes, sensing something was wrong. Olivia could see the hope in his expression, but she couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. She didn't have the strength to tell him what was happening. "Olivia?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with a quiet dread. "What's going on, Mark?" Her voice was barely audible, and she couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They spilled down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. "I've been given 24 hours, she whispered, each word feeling like a weight too heavy to bear. "I'm dying, Mark." His eyes went wide in shock, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them was deafening. Then, as the gravity of the situation sank in, Olivia watched as Mark's face contorted in disbelief, his eyes searching hers for some sign that this wasn't true. "No." Mark's voice was broken, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had just fallen onto them. "No, Olivia, you can't. This can't be happening." "I am so sorry," Olivia whispered again, the guilt overwhelming her. "I wish I had more time." As the reality of the diagnosis settled in, Olivia asked to be alone for a while. The room was cold and sterile, and she felt suffocated by the presence of everyone who loved her, people who were helpless to do anything but watch her slip away. She needed space, time to process the incomprehensible weight of the situation. Mark reluctantly stepped out of the room, his face pale and drawn, but not before planting a kiss on her forehead, a silent promise that he would be there for her until the end. Alone in the quiet, Olivia closed her eyes. The pain in her chest was becoming more intense, but her thoughts were far from the physical agony. She thought of her children, her family, her students, and everything she was about to leave behind. A deep, aching sadness gripped her heart, but amidst it a glimmer of something else, something stronger than fear, she whispered to herself, her voice shaky but firm. "I've always believed in miracles, I still do." In that moment, as the tears fell, Olivia felt a strange sense of peace. There was something powerful in her belief, something beyond the medical diagnosis, beyond the finality of time ticking away. Perhaps, just perhaps, a miracle was still possible. Olivia's hospital room was eerily quiet except for the steady beep of the machines monitoring her condition. The rhythmic sounds seemed to echo through the sterile space, reminding her of the countdown she now faced. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, blending with the distant murmur of voices in the hallway, her family's voices. She could hear them, but their words were too far away to understand. It was as if the world around her was slowly pulling away, leaving her in this tiny bubble of reality. In this moment of isolation, she felt small, insignificant in the grand scheme of everything. The weight of the doctor's words, the finality of them, pressed down on her chest. "You have 24 hours to live." Her body felt heavy, as if it too was starting to give in to the inevitability of what had been foretold. The sharp pain in her side, the tightness in her chest, it all seemed to merge into one undeniable truth. She closed her eyes and took a shallow breath, trying to steady her racing heart. But in the silence of the room, memories began to flood her mind, each one more vivid than the last. She thought of her grandmother, the woman who had always been a beacon of strength and faith in her life. Olivia's grandmother had taught her everything she knew about perseverance, about trusting in something greater than herself. "When you are on the edge, pray and trust," her grandmother's voice echoed softly in Olivia's memory. It was a phrase Olivia had heard countless times, a phrase she had always believed in but never had to rely on, until now. The tears came before she could stop them. They slipped down her cheeks, the salt stinging her skin. She wiped them away with a trembling hand, but the grief, the uncertainty, remained. What if there was no miracle? What if this was truly the end? Olivia's thoughts swirled, tangled between fear and hope. The quiet hospital room felt even more isolating now. She felt as though she was standing at the edge of something vast, something she couldn't control, and she was about to fall into the unknown. But then, despite the heavy silence, something shifted within her. A sense of stillness, a quiet whisper deep inside her heart, urged her forward. Trust. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a booming voice from the heavens, it was just a simple thought, a nudge that urged her to look beyond the pain, beyond the fear, and beyond the bleak reality of the situation. For a moment, Olivia felt her breath steady, and in the silence of her room, she found herself praying. "Lord, I don't know what to ask for," she whispered, her voice raw and hoarse. "But I trust in you. I trust that you can heal me, that you can turn this around. I believe in miracles, and I'm asking, no, I'm begging for one." Her hand gripped the side of the hospital bed, her knuckles turning white as she held onto the frame for support. The pain in her chest seemed to intensify with the pressure, but there was something else there, something deeper. It wasn't just the physical pain anymore. It was her spirit, her soul reaching out, fighting for a chance to survive. "I trust you," she murmured again, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, heal me." As she closed her eyes, a strange calm washed over her. The fear was still there, lingering just beneath the surface, but it was no longer overwhelming. There was a quiet strength within her now, a deep-rooted belief that even in the darkest moments, hope could still exist. In the stillness of her hospital room, Olivia sat in the quiet embrace of her faith, her hand gripping the edge of the bed, a quiet determination rising within her. She wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She would hold on to this moment, hold on to the belief that anything was possible, no matter how impossible it seemed. The quiet of Olivia's hospital room was broken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway, growing louder as they approached. Olivia turned her head slightly, her heart quickening. It was a moment of calm in the storm, and she knew who it was before the door even opened. The door creaked open, and there stood Linda, Olivia's best friend. Linda's presence brought a wave of familiarity, someone Olivia could lean on, someone who had been with her through thick and thin. Linda's eyes were filled with concern, but her smile was hesitant, as if unsure how to approach the situation. "Olivia," Linda said softly, stepping into the room. "How are you feeling?" Olivia smiled weakly, her voice still raspy from the tears and prayers. "Better, I think," she said, her eyes meeting Linda's. "I'm trusting, you know. I've been praying." Linda pulled a chair closer and sat down beside the bed, her fingers drumming nervously against her legs. She knew Olivia's faith well, had seen her lean on it for years during the ups and downs of life. But Linda herself? She was always the more skeptical one, the one who asked questions, who questioned what couldn't be explained by reason. "I just don't know, Olivia," Linda said, her voice betraying the doubt that lingered in her heart. "I mean, I know you believe in miracles, and I know you've always had this deep faith, but I don't know if I can believe in it like you do." Olivia turned her head toward the ceiling, the weight of the words settling in. She had always known Linda's skepticism, but hearing it out loud was a different feeling altogether. Olivia had never expected anyone else to understand her faith completely. She had always known it was something personal, something between her and God. "I've always believed," Olivia replied quietly, her gaze drifting back to Linda. "Since I was little, my grandmother taught me to trust. She always said that when you're at the edge, you pray and trust. And that's what I'm doing now." Linda's eyes softened as she watched her best friend speak with such conviction, her words filled with quiet strength. "I can't say I believe the same way, Olivia, but I'll pray for you. I'll pray that you get your miracle." Olivia offered her a small smile, grateful for the gesture, even if it didn't come with the same kind of certainty she felt in her heart. She knew Linda's words came from a place of love, but it was hard to ignore the hesitation in them. "You don't have to believe like I do," Olivia whispered, her voice gentle. "But I appreciate it. Thank you." There was a long pause as both women sat in the room, the weight of the situation between them. Linda's hands twisted together in her lap, unsure of how to offer the comfort Olivia needed. Finally, Linda stood up, her eyes meeting Olivia's one last time. "I'll let you rest now, Olivia. I'll be here if you need anything. And I'll pray for you." Olivia nodded, her heart aching. "I'll be here too, just waiting and trusting." Linda hesitated at the door, looking back at Olivia one last time. "You're a strong woman, Olivia. I know you'll fight." As Linda stepped out, closing the door softly behind her, Olivia's room felt even quieter than before. She turned her face to the window, the bright sky outside filled with the kind of peace that only nature could offer. Her hand, still gripping the side of the bed, tightened just a little as she stared at the vastness of the sky. "God," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Heal me." The words hung in the air, soft yet powerful, and for a moment Olivia felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she didn't know if her prayer would be answered, but in this moment, She believed with everything she had that she was not alone. The soft beeping of the machines that had been her constant companion the day before was now oddly absent as Olivia slowly stirred from her sleep. She blinked her eyes open, the unfamiliar feeling of lightness sweeping over her as the first rays of morning sunlight crept through the window. She glanced around, her heart beating a little faster, unsure of what to expect. Was it a dream? Had she imagined the quiet moments of prayer, the weight of her fears, the uncertainty? But then she noticed something. The pain, the throbbing ache in her side that had been constant for weeks, the tightness in her chest that made every breath feel like a struggle. It was gone. The room seemed brighter, more vivid, and Olivia realized with a jolt that she felt normal. She sat up in bed, her hands pressing against the cool sheets, unsure if she was dreaming or if this was real. The pain that had once been a constant presence in her life had vanished, and her body felt light, like a weight had been lifted. A wave of relief washed over her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she took a deep, steady breath without the usual discomfort. The door opened, and Dr. Jones stepped in, her face softening into a practiced smile as she walked toward the bed. But Olivia, sitting up and blinking in disbelief, caught the doctor's attention immediately. "Olivia?" Dr. Jones said, her voice full of cautious concern. "How are you feeling this morning?" Olivia couldn't help but smile, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. I feel good," she said, her voice light but filled with wonder. Dr. Jones's brow furrowed slightly as she placed a hand on the edge of Olivia's bed, her gaze drifting over the various monitors. "Are you sure? I know yesterday was difficult." "I'm sure," Olivia replied, her eyes meeting Dr. Jones's. "I've never felt better." But Dr. Jones wasn't so sure. She glanced at the machines, checking Olivia's vitals, her face flickering between confusion and disbelief. The numbers on the monitors were steady, stable, too steady. There was no sign of distress, no irregularities, no sign of illness. Olivia's heart was steady, her breathing normal. It was as though the cancer, the pain, had simply vanished. Dr. Jones quickly adjusted her glasses and turned to the clipboard she'd brought into the room. "This can't be right," she murmured to herself, her fingers flipping through the pages. "The test results. This isn't possible." Without saying another word, she stepped toward the door, calling over her shoulder, "I'll be right back." It wasn't long before Dr. Jones returned, this time accompanied by a nurse with a fresh set of test equipment. She didn't speak much as she gestured for Olivia to remain still. The room was filled with the soft sounds of the machines as they hummed and beeped in the background. Olivia could feel her nerves creeping back, the uncertainty hanging in the air. Her chest tightened for a moment, but she reminded herself. This was what she had prayed for. The words that had echoed in her mind for hours, "I trust you," brought a sense of calm to her. Dr. Jones began to administer the tests again, methodically running the checks she had performed the day before. She tapped on the monitor and glanced at the results, her brow furrowing deeper with each passing moment. The confusion on her face only grew as she read over the test results once more. "I don't understand," Dr. Jones finally muttered, glancing up at Olivia. "These tests, they're normal. There's no sign of cancer. Your vitals are perfect. There's nothing. It's as if the disease was never here." Olivia could see the disbelief in Dr. Jones's eyes. The doctor's hands were still shaking slightly as she turned back to the tests. She began checking them again, running her fingers across the papers in a futile search for an explanation. "How is this possible?" Dr. Jones asked, her voice almost a whisper, as if trying to make sense of something her mind couldn't comprehend. Olivia, still sitting calmly in her bed, looked at Dr. Jones with a serene smile. "Faith," she said simply, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "I believe in miracles. I've always believed." Dr. Jones blinked, taken aback by Olivia's answer. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words faltered. The rational part of her brain wanted to dismiss the idea, to find a scientific explanation, but in this moment, she could not. "Faith?" "Ah," Dr. Jones repeated, her gaze softening as she looked at Olivia with a mix of awe and skepticism. "I don't know what to say." The silence between them lingered for a moment, the weight of the unexplained miracle settling in the air. Dr. Jones was a doctor, a woman of science, but as she stood there, she couldn't deny the truth staring her in the face. Olivia Bills had defied all logic. The impossible had happened. and no amount of tests or scientific explanations could make sense of it. With a deep sigh, Dr. Jones set down the clipboard and gave Olivia a look that was both respectful and uncertain. "Well, whatever the reason, this is nothing short of a miracle," Olivia smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. "I believe it's more than that. It's just faith." The door to Olivia's hospital room had just closed behind Dr. Jones as she left to gather her thoughts, leaving Olivia in an unsettling silence. But the quiet didn't last long. The soft murmur of voices reached Olivia's ears as two doctors stepped into the hallway just outside her door. The first voice was familiar, Dr. Jones still struggling to process what had just happened. The second voice, deeper and more authoritative, belonged to Dr. Dallas, a senior oncologist who had been consulted for Olivia's case from the start. "Emery, you're telling me that Olivia Bill's cancer is gone? Completely gone? No sign of any trace of the disease?" Dr. Dallas's voice was laced with disbelief, his tone sharp and skeptical. "I know how this sounds, Dallas, but it's true. The scans show no evidence of any tumors, no cancerous cells at all. Her vitals are normal, stable, she's showing no signs of illness," Dr. Jones replied, her voice tinged with frustration. She paced the hallway, a hand running through her hair as she tried to piece the puzzle together. "I've never seen anything like this." Dr. Dallas scoffed, his voice thick with skepticism. "There has to be something. You're a doctor, Mary. You've seen cases like this. It doesn't just disappear. It can't. Not without treatment. Not without medical intervention." "But that's the thing, Dallas. She hasn't received any treatment. No chemotherapy, no radiation, nothing. Just prayer. That's the only explanation she's offering." "Prayer?" Dr. Dallas repeated incredulously, his tone a mix of confusion and disbelief. "You're telling me that she just prayed it away? This is science, Mary. This is medicine. There has to be a rational explanation. We've run every test we could think of." Dr. Jones stopped pacing, the weight of the conversation settling in. She turned toward Dr. Dallas, her voice quieter now, almost contemplative. "I've seen her health decline so rapidly. She was in agony just yesterday. And now? Now she's pain-free. I can't explain it." Dr. Dallas crossed his arms, his face tight with skepticism. "So, what? You're just going to accept this as some miracle? Do you really think that's a reasonable explanation? We've spent years studying this disease, and we know the progression. There's no way she could have spontaneously healed without medical intervention." Jones let out a long sigh, rubbing the back of her neck. She felt the strain of it all, the pressure to make sense of what was happening. She had always prided herself on being grounded in science, but this was defying all logic. "I don't know what to say, Dallas. It's impossible. But she's healed. And the scans show that she's cancer-free. No abnormal cells, no trace of the tumors that were there yesterday." Dr. Dallas was silent for a moment, staring at Dr. Jones, his face an unreadable mask. He then spoke again, more forcefully. "Well, I'm not convinced. I think we need to run more tests. We can't just dismiss this. Not yet. This might be a temporary remission, but we need to be sure. I'm scheduling another round of tests, and I want her under observation." Dr. Jones nodded slowly, though her mind was racing. "I agree. But I'm telling you, Dallas, there's something different about this case. Something we can't explain." From inside her room, Olivia could hear their voices more clearly now, the sound of their heated conversation filtering through the thin walls. She tried to focus on the words, but the emotions swirling inside her made it hard to stay calm. Prayer. The word echoed in her mind. It had been her quiet plea, her whispered trust in something beyond the tangible, beyond science. She hadn't expected anyone to understand, but she never imagined they would be questioning her faith. It wasn't that she was angry, it was the uncertainty. They couldn't see what she had felt, what she still felt, that deep, undeniable sense that her healing was not some coincidence or medical anomaly. It was more than that. It was faith. The voices outside grew louder, and Olivia could hear Dr. Dallas's words cut through the quiet. She must undergo further treatment, whether she wants to or not. We cannot risk assuming that this is permanent. We need to keep a close watch. A sigh escaped Olivia's lips. The doctors were caught in a battle between reason and the impossible. They couldn't reconcile what had happened, but she could feel it. Her body was healed, free of the pain, the sickness, and yet the medical world couldn't explain it. She closed her eyes, resting her hands on the bed as she sat up slowly. She could still hear the faint murmur of Dr. Jones and Dr. Dallas in the hallway, debating the details. Their skepticism wasn't going to change what she knew to be true. "Lord, I trust you," she whispered softly to herself. I trust that you're with me." Dr. Dallas's voice grew faint as he spoke again, still sounding resolute. "I'll be back in an hour to reassess. We'll do more tests and we'll see if we can find a cause for this. It's simply not possible for her to be completely free of cancer without treatment." Dr. Jones's voice, though still tinged with doubt, carried a hint of uncertainty. "I know, Dallas, I know. But whatever the reason, she's not the same woman she was yesterday. I just don't know how to explain it." The door to Olivia's room opened suddenly and both doctors entered, their expressions a mixture of confusion and concern. Dr. Jones, glancing at Olivia, gave a small, uncertain smile. "How are you feeling, Olivia?" she asked. Her voice gentle, but there was an underlying tension. Olivia smiled, a quiet but unwavering confidence in her eyes. "I'm feeling healed. And I know it's not just by chance. It's by faith." Dr. Dallas studied her with a skeptical look. "You're still in shock. That's understandable. But we'll run the tests again, and we'll make sure this isn't a fluke." Olivia looked directly at him, her voice calm and steady. "You do what you need to do, but I know what's happened, and I trust in the healing that's taken place." The room fell silent, the two doctors caught in their own confusion and uncertainty, while Olivia sat there feeling a peace she hadn't known in days. It was as if in that very moment she had no need to explain the unexplainable. She had already received her miracle. The days following Olivia's miraculous recovery were filled with a quiet joy, but beneath the surface, a subtle tension lingered. In the warmth of her home, her children Lily and Jake couldn't contain their excitement. They spent hours with their mother, filling the house with laughter, their voices bubbling with happiness as they celebrated the return of the woman they thought they might lose forever. "Mom, you look so much better," Lily exclaimed one afternoon, her arms wrapped tightly around Olivia as they sat together on the couch. "I knew you'd get better, but this is amazing." Jake bounced excitedly on the sofa beside her. "Yeah, it's like you're a superhero, like a miracle, Mom," he grinned, clearly in awe of his mother's recovery. Olivia smiled, her heart swelling with love as she looked at her children. Their joy filled her with warmth. "I'm just happy to be here with you both," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But, as the joy of her recovery filled the house, Olivia could sense the unease lingering in the corner of her home. Mark, her husband, had been quieter than usual, his smile smaller, his eyes more distant. Olivia noticed it in the way he watched her, like he was still searching for some explanation, some reason behind the change he couldn't quite accept. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Mark sat down next to Olivia on the porch. The sky was darkening, a soft breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. Olivia reached for his hand, but Mark withdrew slightly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You've been feeling all right?" Mark asked, his voice hesitant, though his eyes were full of concern. "I'm fine, Mark, really," Olivia replied, her tone reassuring. "I feel better than I've felt in years." Mark nodded slowly, his gaze wandering to the distance. "I know, it doesn't make sense. We've been told one thing for so long and now you're fine. No treatments, no medications, nothing. I can't help but wonder if the doctors missed something. If maybe there's something else going on here." Olivia's heart sank at his words. She could hear the doubt in his voice, the skepticism that had crept in despite the joy she felt. "Mark, I know this is hard to believe. It's hard for me too, but I feel it. I know I'm healed." Mark looked at her, his brow furrowed with concern. "I want to believe you, Olivia, I really do. But I don't know how to explain it. What if the doctors are wrong? What if it's temporary?" The weight of his doubt pressed down on Olivia, but she refused to let it weaken her resolve. "I don't know how to explain it either, but I'm not questioning it. I know this is real. It's not temporary. It's a miracle." Mark didn't say anything for a moment. He simply stared at the horizon, his mind clearly working through the questions that lingered. "I want to believe," he repeated softly. As Olivia's recovery became known throughout the town, people reacted in different ways. Some came to visit her, their faces filled with awe and wonder, convinced that Olivia's miraculous healing was a sign of something greater. They spoke in hushed tones, telling others about her recovery, their eyes wide with admiration and belief. "I heard Olivia Bill's cancer just disappeared," one of the neighbors whispered to another at the local grocery store. "She's a walking miracle, there's no other way to explain it." But not everyone shared the same sense of awe. As the rumors spread, some people were more skeptical, questioning how something so miraculous could happen without any medical explanation. "Did you hear about Olivia?" a local woman asked her friend in the park. "They say she's healed, but do you really think it's true? Cancer doesn't just disappear like that." "I don't know," the other woman replied with a shrug. "It sounds like a fairy tale to me." As the days went by, the town seemed divided. Some embraced Olivia's recovery as a divine act, while others dismissed it as a fluke, a coincidence, or a medical anomaly that had somehow been missed. Olivia, however, remained unaware of the whispers around her, choosing instead to focus on her family and the peace she had found in her healing. She attended church services with Mark and the kids, where the pastor spoke about faith and miracles, and Olivia's heart swelled with gratitude. She had found peace in the divine healing she had received, and that peace remained unshaken by the doubts of others. Meanwhile, the pressure from the medical community was beginning to mount. Dr. Jones had been in frequent contact with Olivia, still unable to explain the healing that had taken place. She continued to monitor Olivia's progress, running tests and asking for regular updates. But each time the results came back, they were the same: no trace of cancer, no explanation for the sudden improvement. Dr. Dallas, who had been more vocal in his skepticism, demanded that Olivia return for further testing, despite her stable condition. "We can't simply dismiss this," he insisted to Dr. Jones during one of their meetings. "There's something we're missing, and we need to find it before we can conclude that this is truly a recovery." Dr. Jones, though still uncertain, found herself caught between her growing belief in Olivia's healing and her professional duty to find a medical explanation. "I don't know what to say, Dallas. I'm just as baffled as you are." But the pressure was starting to wear on Olivia. As much as she wanted to continue with her life, there was always a nagging thought in the back of her mind. What if they were right? What if the cancer was still there, hidden, waiting to return? And what if this miracle wasn't permanent? Despite the uncertainty around her, Olivia continued to stand firm in her faith. Every time doubt crept in, she would remind herself of the healing she had experienced, of the peace she felt in her soul. "I trust you, Lord," she would whisper to herself each night before falling asleep. "I trust in your plan." It had been a few days since Olivia's miraculous recovery, and despite the joy and confusion that filled her life, a lingering sense of unease remained. The doctors were still perplexed. Her family was still unsure, and Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this healing than she could understand. That morning, after her routine checkup with Dr. Jones, Olivia sat in the hospital's waiting room. It was a quiet, dimly lit space filled with patients waiting for their turn, the soft murmur of voices mingling with the distant sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. It wasn't an unfamiliar scene, but today, Olivia felt a peculiar stillness in the air. She sat by the window, staring out at the gray sky, lost in her thoughts. Her mind drifted between the physical changes she'd experienced and the unsettling pressure of the unanswered questions surrounding her healing. It felt as if the world had shifted around her, but she was still trying to find her place within it. Her gaze wandered over the other people in the room, none of whom seemed to notice her presence. But then, in the corner of her eye, a woman entered. She was tall, her figure outlined by the soft light from the hallway as she walked toward the chairs. She wore a long dark coat, and her face, though familiar in some distant way, was entirely unknown to Olivia. The woman's presence was striking, not just because she was so composed, but because something about her seemed out of place, almost ethereal. She moved with an unsettling calm, her gaze locked onto Olivia the moment she stepped through the door. Without a word, the woman sat down in the chair next to Olivia, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Olivia turned toward her, slightly startled by the sudden appearance of the stranger. She couldn't help but notice how the woman's eyes seemed to glow with an intensity that Olivia couldn't quite explain. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and then the woman's voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "It was not just prayer, you know," the woman said, her eyes locking with Olivia's. "It was the faith of those around you. Their belief, their hope carried you through." Olivia's breath caught in her throat, the weight of the stranger's words sinking in. How did she know? Olivia hadn't spoken of her faith to anyone but her family and friends. Could this woman have heard her story from someone else? But something about the way the words were spoken felt personal, as if they were meant for her alone. "What do you mean?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper, confusion clouding her thoughts. She had no idea why she felt compelled to ask, but the question escaped her lips before she could stop it. The woman smiled softly, a knowing, almost comforting smile that made Olivia feel both seen and misunderstood at the same time. "You were not alone in this, Olivia. Your faith is powerful, yes, but it was the people around you, the ones who prayed for you, the ones who held you in their hearts. That's what made this possible." Olivia stared at the woman, her heart racing, the question lingering on her tongue. Who was this person? How could she know so much? Before she could ask anything more, the woman stood up, her movements graceful and deliberate. She looked at Olivia one last time, her expression full of quiet intensity. "Remember," the woman said softly, "faith doesn't just come from one person. It spreads, it connects, and it heals." And with that she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of waiting patients in the hallway as if she had never been there. Olivia sat still, staring at the empty chair where the woman had been moments before. She blinked, certain that she had just experienced something far beyond the ordinary. Had she imagined it? The stranger's words still echoed in her mind, their meaning both haunting and comforting. It was as if the woman had known exactly what Olivia needed to hear. Something to reassure her, to validate her faith in the face of all the doubt that surrounded her. But where had she gone? Olivia looked around the waiting room, her eyes scanning the sea of faces, but there was no sign of the woman. She had simply vanished into thin air, as if she had never existed at all. For a moment, Olivia felt a strange sense of peace settle over her, as if the encounter had been a sign, a confirmation that her healing was no accident, no coincidence. It had been something greater, something she couldn't yet understand. Her heart swelled with renewed conviction. "Lord," she whispered under her breath, her eyes turned toward the window, "I trust in you." The church was bathed in soft, golden light as the sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns onto the pews. It was a quiet Sunday morning, and Olivia's family had decided to attend the service together. Despite the ongoing questions surrounding her miraculous recovery, Olivia felt a deep need to connect with her faith. Something about the church's calm, reverent atmosphere filled her with peace, as if she had come home to a place of solace and certainty. Mark, still wary but supportive, sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. Lily and Jake sat quietly in the pew, the faint sound of their whispers barely audible as they flipped through the hymnals. Olivia's heart swelled with love for her family, but it was more than just the connection to them. It was the sense of serenity that enveloped her as she sat there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the congregation. As the pastor began the sermon, Olivia's mind wandered to the events of the past few days. The doctor's confusion, the doubts of her husband, and the skeptical whispers in town. They all seemed so distant now. Here, in the presence of God, she felt a deep sense of knowing that this healing wasn't an accident. It was divine. It was a gift. And no matter how the world tried to explain it, she was at peace with it. The pastor's voice filled the room, his words speaking directly to Olivia's heart. He spoke of healing, of faith, and of the power of believing in something greater than oneself. "When we open our hearts to God's will," he said, his voice strong and unwavering, "we allow Him to work miracles in our lives. Healing isn't just about the body, it's about the soul, the mind, and the spirit. And when we trust in Him, when we have faith, He will show us the way." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes as she sat there, listening to the sermon. It was as if every word was meant for her. In that moment, she understood her healing more deeply than she ever had before. It wasn't just her physical body that had been touched. It was her spirit, her soul, that had been renewed. The pain, the fear, the uncertainty, they had all been replaced with an overwhelming peace, a peace that came from knowing that God was with her, guiding her every step of the way. As the pastor continued, Olivia felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The burden of doubt, of questioning whether her healing was real, faded into the background. She was no longer worried about the opinions of others or the skepticism of the doctors. In this moment, all that mattered was the unshakable peace in her heart. The peace that came from knowing she had been healed not by human hands, but by divine grace. Just as Olivia closed her eyes to let the moment wash over her, a voice broke through the tranquility of the church. It was a voice she recognized, but one she never expected to hear in this sacred space. Olivia, her eyes snapped open and she turned to see Dr. Dallas standing at the edge of the aisle, his eyes locked on her. The church, which had been filled with a serene hum, seemed to grow suddenly quieter. Olivia felt a knot form in her stomach, and she instinctively squeezed Mark's hand as if to steady herself. Dr. Dallas's gaze was intense, his expression a mix of concern and skepticism. He took a few steps toward her, his voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere like a sharp blade. "Olivia," he repeated, his tone firm, "I need to speak with you. This cannot be allowed to continue." Olivia's heart raced as she stood up slowly, Mark's hand still resting in hers. "What are you doing here, Dr. Dallas?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been looking into your case," he said, his words sharp and accusing, "and I can't in good conscience let this go. Your sudden recovery, your healing, it's not possible. You have to stop misleading the community. People are starting to believe in something that doesn't make sense." The tension in the air thickened. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She had expected skepticism from him, but the harshness in his words stung nonetheless. He wasn't just questioning her healing. He was questioning her faith. "Misleading?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly but still filled with resolve. "I'm not misleading anyone, Dr. Dallas. What happened to me is real. I was healed. You can test me all you want, you can run every test you can think of, but the healing, the peace I feel, that can't be explained by science." Dr. Dallas shook his head, his frustration evident. "I'm not here to discuss your feelings, Olivia. This is about facts. You were diagnosed with terminal cancer. You had hours to live. And now you're fine. There's no medical explanation for it, and people are starting to believe it's a miracle. But miracles don't happen like this. They just don't." Olivia took a deep breath, standing tall despite the pounding in her chest. Her hand, still trembling, reached out and gripped the edge of the pew. She had never felt more certain of anything in her life. "You can explain everything, Dr. Dallas," she said quietly, her voice unwavering. "But you cannot explain my heart's peace." The words hung in the air, and for a moment Dr. Dallas was silent. His mouth opened as if to say something more, but no words came. The noise of the church around them seemed to fade into the background, and all that mattered was the quiet strength that radiated from Olivia. Finally, Dr. Dallas let out a heavy sigh and turned to leave, though his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer. "We'll continue to monitor you, Olivia, but you need to understand that this doesn't make sense." Olivia watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the distance, and then she turned back to her family. Mark, who had been silently observing the confrontation, squeezed her hand and nodded, as if to reassure her that everything was going to be okay. For Olivia, the confrontation with Dr. Dallas was more than just a challenge to her faith. It was a reaffirmation of the peace she had found. The world could doubt, question, and scrutinize her healing, but nothing would take away the profound sense of peace she had experienced. A peace that had come from trusting in something far greater than anything medicine or science could explain. With a deep breath, Olivia closed her eyes once more and whispered, "I trust you, Lord." The day after the confrontation with Dr. Dallas weighed heavily on Olivia's heart. While the doubts from the medical community and from her own family lingered, she tried to push them aside. She had already made up her mind. She knew her healing was not just a fluke or coincidence. It was something greater, something divine. Yet the question still swirled in the back of her mind. Why? Why was she chosen for this healing? Why was he chosen? Why was he? What was the purpose? That evening, after dinner, Olivia found herself alone in the quiet of her bedroom. The children were asleep, and Mark had retreated into the living room, as was his habit when he needed space to think. She sat by the window, looking out at the dimming sky, the colors of the sunset fading into the night. She hadn't prayed much since the morning of her recovery, at least not in the way she had when she first asked for healing. The rush of emotions and the whirlwind of activity in the days since had kept her mind occupied, but tonight, there was a stillness. Tonight she felt as though she needed to reconnect with the God who had answered her desperate plea. With a deep breath, Olivia knelt beside her bed, closing her eyes as she folded her hands together. The room was silent except for the soft rustling of leaves outside the window. The air in the room seemed to grow thicker, as if it was charged with something more than the ordinary. Her thoughts began to quiet, and she focused on her prayer. "Ought," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. "Thank you for healing me. Thank you for giving me back my life. But I need to understand, what is the purpose of this? Why me?" Her heart felt heavy as she asked the question, but her faith was unwavering. She had always believed that God's will was a mystery, one that couldn't always be understood, but one that could always be trusted. She just needed to understand this. As she knelt there in silence, a warmth began to spread through her chest, and for the first time she felt a presence, a deep, enveloping sense of peace that filled the room. It wasn't the physical warmth of the room itself. It was something more profound, something spiritual, and then she heard it. "Faith in God's will is the true path to healing. This is your mission." Olivia's eyes snapped open, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was familiar. It was her grandmother's voice, clear as if she were standing beside her. Her grandmother had passed years ago, but Olivia had always carried her wisdom with her. Her heart ached with the memory, and for a moment she closed her eyes again, as if to savor the comfort of hearing her grandmother's words once more. The voice continued, though it was gentle and calm, like a whisper in the stillness. "You have been healed, Olivia, not just for yourself, but for others. You have been chosen to carry a message of faith, of healing, and of trust in God's plan. This is your mission now. Share your story and let others see the power of faith." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of clarity. The words resonated within her, and for the first time since her healing, she understood the deeper meaning of what had happened to her. It wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about her physical healing or her own life being spared. Her recovery was meant to inspire others, to show them that faith in God's will could bring about miraculous change. "I will, Lord," Olivia whispered, her voice filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "I will share my story. I will let others see your power." The presence of her grandmother's voice faded, leaving behind a deep peace that filled Olivia's soul. She sat there in the quiet of her room for a long while, absorbing the weight of the vision she had just experienced. She knew, in that moment, that her healing had a purpose far beyond herself. She had been chosen to carry a message, to spread the truth of divine healing, and to show others that trust in God's plan could lead to miracles. As Olivia stood up, a sense of clarity washed over her. She understood now. Her healing wasn't just a gift for her, it was a beacon of hope for others. The faith she had carried in her heart had not only healed her body, but had also given her a greater purpose: to inspire others to believe, to trust, and to open their hearts to the possibility of miracles. The doubts that had lingered in her heart faded away. She no longer needed to question the reasons behind her recovery. The answer was clear. Her mission had just begun. The next morning, as the sun rose over Maple Ridge, Olivia stood in front of her family, her children's bright smiles filling her heart with warmth. She had a new sense of purpose, and she knew that her journey wasn't just about the healing she had received. It was about sharing the message of faith and healing with the world. With renewed strength, Olivia looked at her children and whispered, "This is just the beginning." A few weeks had passed since Olivia's miraculous recovery, and life, although returning to some sense of normalcy, felt different. The doubt that had once clouded her mind had been replaced with an unwavering sense of purpose. The clarity she had gained from her vision, the understanding of her mission, had set her on a new path. It was a path she hadn't expected, but one she knew she had to follow. Olivia began to speak to small groups within her community, sharing her story with anyone who would listen. Her words were simple yet profound. She didn't rely on eloquent speeches or grand gestures. She spoke from the heart, recounting her journey, the pain she had endured, and the faith that had carried her through it all. She told them about the doctors, about the miracle, and most importantly, about the unwavering trust she had placed in God's will. Each time she spoke, there was a sense of awe and wonder that filled the room. People listened, captivated, not just by her story, but by the way she spoke of faith and healing. Olivia didn't try to convince anyone. She simply shared her experience, letting the truth of her words speak for themselves. One evening, at a small community gathering, Olivia stood in front of a group of women who had gathered to hear her story. Their faces were full of curiosity, some filled with skepticism, others with quiet hope. Olivia smiled as she began, her voice steady and confident. "I was told I had hours to live," she began, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "But I didn't give up. I prayed, I trusted, and I believed. And that belief, my faith in God, brought me healing. It wasn't medicine, it wasn't science, it was faith. And I'm standing here today because I know that nothing is impossible with God." The room was silent as Olivia's words sank in. A few women exchanged looks, and Olivia could see the flicker of hope in their eyes. She knew that her story was more than just a personal victory. It was a testament to the power of prayer, to the miraculous transformation that faith could bring. Over time, Olivia's testimony spread, and more people sought her out. They came to her for guidance, for hope, for reassurance that miracles were real. And as she shared her story with them, Olivia felt a deeper connection to her community, to the people who had once been strangers, but now shared in the belief that faith could move mountains. The next few weeks saw Olivia becoming more involved in the community, attending events and speaking at local gatherings. She had been invited to speak at churches, prayer groups, and even small town meetings. Her story became a beacon of light for those who had lost hope, for those who were struggling with their own battles, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. At each event, Olivia saw the same transformation: doubt turning to belief, fear turning to hope. She heard stories of others who, after hearing her speak, had found the strength to pray, to believe, and to trust in something greater than themselves. It was in those moments, when she saw the impact her words had on others, that Olivia understood her true purpose. She wasn't just a recipient of a miracle, she was a messenger of faith. One evening at a larger community event, Olivia stood on stage, looking out at the sea of faces. There were people from all walks of life. Some had heard her story before, others were hearing it for the first time. But as she spoke, she could feel the energy in the room shift. There was something powerful in the air, something that connected all of them, a shared belief in the possibility of miracles. As she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. But it wasn't just applause for her. It was applause for the hope she had reignited in their hearts. The applause was a celebration of the power of prayer, of divine healing, and of the strength that comes from trusting in God's plan. After the event, Olivia stood outside in the cool evening air, taking a moment to herself. The sky was painted with hues of pink and purple as the sun began to set, the horizon stretching out before her like an open road. Mark joined her outside, his presence a comforting reminder of the love and support they had shared through everything. He stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, as they both looked out at the horizon. "You've done something amazing, Olivia," Mark said quietly, his voice filled with pride. "You've touched so many lives. I've never seen you so fulfilled." Olivia smiled softly, her eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. "It's not just me, Mark. It's all of us. It's everyone who's been praying, everyone who believes. This healing wasn't just for me. It's meant to inspire others, to show them that anything is possible when we trust in God's will." As she stood there, surrounded by the stillness of the evening, Olivia whispered to herself, as much to the sky as to her own heart, "It's not over yet. This is only the beginning." The sun had finally set and the air had cooled, casting a serene twilight over Olivia's home. The night was quiet, and after the community event, Olivia and Mark sat together on the porch, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves around them. They hadn't said much since the event. There was no need for words. They both felt the peace that had settled over them, the certainty that Olivia's journey was unfolding in ways they had never imagined. Olivia's phone, which had been resting on the table beside her, suddenly vibrated, breaking the calm silence of the evening. She glanced at it, a little startled by the interruption, and saw an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Without hesitation, she picked it up, holding it to her ear. "Hello?" she asked, her voice soft yet curious. On the other end, a voice, a woman's voice, spoke clearly, though there was a strange urgency in the tone. "Is this Olivia Bills?" the woman asked. "Yes, this is she," Olivia replied, her curiosity piqued. "Who's this?" I'm sorry to call you out of the blue," the woman began, her voice shaky with emotion. "But I've heard your story. I heard about your recovery. I need to tell you something." Olivia's heart skipped a beat, sensing the gravity of the conversation. She sat up straighter in her chair, Mark noticing the change in her demeanor as she listened intently. "I was at the event last week," the woman continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I had been struggling with my own illness, something the doctors had told me was incurable. I felt hopeless, but when I heard you speak, when I heard your words, something changed inside me. I can't explain it, but I was healed, Olivia. The pain that I had been living with for so long just disappeared. I'm telling you, I was healed the moment I heard your words." The phone slipped slightly from Olivia's hand as she struggled to process what the woman was saying. "You? You were healed?" Olivia repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. She was stunned, unable to fully grasp the depth of what she was hearing. "Yes," the woman replied, a note of wonder in her voice. "I don't know how or why, but I felt it in my body. I haven't felt this good in years, and I know it's because of what you said, your faith. It gave me the courage to believe. And now I'm well. I'm healed, just like you." Olivia's mind raced as she listened to the woman's words. Could this really be true? Was her healing, her testimony, truly affecting people in ways she had never anticipated? She had always believed in the power of prayer, but this was more than she could have imagined. "Thank you," the woman continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for sharing your story. You've given me my life back." Olivia was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of the call. The healing, the faith, it was rippling out in ways she had never thought possible. It wasn't just about her anymore. Her recovery was part of a bigger plan. A plan to inspire others, to show them that miracles could happen when they trusted in something greater. "I don't know what to say," Olivia whispered, her voice filled with awe. "I'm so glad to hear your story. I'm so glad you're well." "Just know that your words made a difference," the woman said, her voice steady now. "You're not alone in this. You've touched my life, and I'm sure you've touched so many others." As the woman thanked her one last time and hung up, Olivia sat back in her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. Mark, who had been watching her closely, leaned in, his voice gentle. "What happened?" he asked, his eyes filled with curiosity. Olivia looked at him, a mixture of disbelief and wonder in her eyes. "Mark, I just got a call. A woman, she was healed just like me. She heard my story and she's healed." Mark's expression softened, and for the first time in days a true smile spread across his face. "It's happening, isn't it?" Olivia nodded slowly, her heart swelling with a newfound understanding. "Yes, it's bigger than I thought. This is only the beginning." The camera slowly zoomed out, leaving Olivia and Mark sitting together on the porch, the night stretching out before them. The stars twinkled above, and the horizon seemed to promise something new, something profound. Olivia's healing was just the beginning, and there was so much more to come. As the camera began to fade to black, Olivia's voice, filled with quiet determination, was heard one last time. "It's not over yet," she whispered, her eyes turning toward the vast dark sky. "This is only the beginning.